When we think of deer, we usually picture delicate four-legged animals who calmly graze in fields, gently nibbling at plants. However, as beautiful as these creatures might seem from a distance, plenty of farmers will paint a completely different image of voracious beasts who decimate their hard work. Japan officials know firsthand the incredible damage deer can inflict on the communities they live in. So when retired Professor Naoki Maruyama heard about the problem, he came up with a controversial scheme to solve it. But not everyone is so thrilled about it. People who take a trip to the Japanese city of Nara are offered a unique opportunity to get some very hands-on experiences with deer. Thousands of them roam alongside the residents. But sometimes the deer get too comfortable. See, if you're not careful, they'll push their noses right into you, looking for food. They also engage in a rare phenomenon the Japanese call shikadamari. During shikadamari, which loosely means deer gathering spot, hundreds of deer all meet in the same small area at the same time every single day. Clearly, it captures the attention of anyone nearby. This bizarre unified activity lasts for about an hour before they all get up and disperse. Now, as amazing and mysterious as this event is, having so many deer around is quickly becoming a problem. See, deer have an insatiable appetite, and when they travel in large groups through forests and farmlands, they decimate the vegetation, which is a massive problem for farmers trying to grow crops. Incredibly, deer can put away up to 5 pounds of plant matter every day. If you think about what 5 pounds of something as light as leaves looks like, that's a whole lot of deforestation occurring. The deer population wasn't always overabundant. In recent years, strict gun laws made hunting difficult, so far fewer people do it. In fact, there were nearly 1/3 fewer hunters as of 2015 compared to 40 years earlier. Also, venison just isn't really a food the Japanese eat frequently, which means there's not a demand for the meat. So, what exactly can be done? A retired professor thinks he has the perfect solution. Naoki Maruyama, one of the chairmen of the Japan Wolf Association, thinks introducing wolves into many of the national parks and forests will immediately help. Wolves have been extinct in Japan for decades, but Naoki wants to change that. Japan used to be home to both Ezo and Honshu wolves thanks to connecting land bridges from Asia and Russia. However, aggressive hunting policies led to the Ezo extinction in 1889 and Honshu extinction in 1905. But, now deer are costing farmers millions of dollars a year in crop damage, and until something is done, it will grow exponentially worse. This idea first came to Naoki while visiting a national park in Poland. In 1988, the professor was visiting Poland's Bieszczady National Park and noticed a plethora of wild wolves roaming the land, controlling the deer population. He was so enthralled with the idea he wrote a letter to several ecological societies. He implored the groups to embrace wolf introduction. He wrote, "As a researcher on the social ecology and conservation management of deer, I realized the importance of the existence of predator wolves. However, every single one of them rejected his plea for support." That was when the Japan Wolf Association was formed in 1993. Instead of speaking with ecological groups, the association reached out directly to the public for an opinion. It can be tough to convince people to introduce a new predator where they live, but overall, wolves are viewed favorably throughout Japanese history, especially in mythology. However, there's one famous fable that lingers in people's minds. Little Red Riding Hood, although clearly a fictional tale, painted wolves in a horrific human-craving light. This had quite a negative impact on the people of Japan, but Naoki wants to break this stereotype. And it's important he does. The island of Hokkaido is home to 600,000 residents, and every year, roughly 2,000 people get into car accidents due to deer. In 2015, Japan's Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries even released a report stating $53 million of damage was attributed to the animals. But it's the human-wolf interactions that scare people opposing Naoki's solution. Wolves aren't cute dogs that wag their tail and lick your face. They're predatory animals that could seriously maul someone. But, there's a greater good at play here. So much money would be saved if Japan chooses to go with Naoki's plan. Whether or not it will eventually happen is tough to say, but Naoki and the Japan Wolf Association will continue their efforts to change minds about the predators. The introduction of wolves into Japan's national parks would have an amazing effect. For those who are skeptical, however, one look at a situation that unfolded in America's Yellowstone National Park in 1995 could change their minds. Yellowstone National Park wasn't always as rich with animals and nature as it is today. It was never an unsightly spot to explore, of course, but in the 80s and early 90s, you wouldn't have been as awestruck by its beauty. Before 1926, Yellowstone National Park was full of wolves. They thrived in the park, but within the first few decades of the 1900s, government predator control programs wiped them out entirely. This was a problem. No one saw another wolf until 1977, about 50 years later, but, even then, it was a lone wolf or two merely wandering through. Oddly, it was the lack of these wolves that led to the park's decline. With no predators to fear, the deer population absolutely exploded. They could eat and overgraze all they wanted without worrying about wolves. Soon, the forests and meadows were barren, but the deer and their ilk kept at it. As the deer kept grazing, taking all the resources for themselves, the other animals suffered. Creatures that dined on fauna stood no chance in the food race against deer. Animals that ate those animals saw their food supply dwindle. And the rapid loss of vegetation didn't just leave the forests bare. Without vegetation keeping soil in place, the rivers that ran through Yellowstone began eroding, which prompted the loss of many animal species who relied on healthy waters to survive. Yellowstone was struggling, and park employees needed to find a solution. It really all boiled down to the high numbers of deer, they knew, so, in 1995, they hatched a plan. The deer needed predators, plain and simple, and workers figured this would be the perfect time to reintroduce wolves back into Yellowstone. Packs of gray wolves were released into the park, and hopeful employees prayed it was the answer. Now, the deer were suddenly thrust back into the predator versus prey world, and even though there were far fewer wolves than deer, the wolves were fearsome hunters. They welcomed the challenge. Day and night, the battle ensued, and the wolves were the victors nearly every time. This relationship between the wolves and deer is known as top-down control. Top-down control is when predators who sit atop the food chain assist with the regulation of the animals who are beneath them. That's exactly what happened when the wolves were reintroduced. With deer numbers dwindling, the vegetation flourished. Aspen and willow trees that hadn't seen a successful life for decades finally grew back tenfold, and it seemed they were healthier than ever. But the trees were just the very beginning of the massive change. The waterways running through the parks began changing, and the regenerated vegetation growing on the riverbeds brought with it a whole new array of life not seen in such a long time. For the first time in forever, beavers returned to the water. They began constructing their intricate dams, which contributed to a habitat that attracted a variety of reptiles, otters, and muskrats. Because of the increased vegetation, mice and rabbits thrived, which, in turn, gave the red fox an amazing feasting opportunity. Red fox numbers grew, and still, there was even more happening. The number of bears also increased. The deer had scoured bushes and ate the same berries the bears enjoyed, but with the berries now finally plentiful again, the bears could eat without a problem. Through it all, the wolves gained a feathery friend. Ravens are known to follow behind wolves and pick at the remains of whatever they hunt and kill. The four-legged assassins were hard at work, and those ravens were always close behind. The new lush vegetation not only benefited all of the animals, but it helped drastically slow down, and sometimes completely stop, the erosion of riverbeds. The changes were nothing short of miraculous. Incredibly, the wolves, although nowhere near as abundant in numbers as the deer they hunted, managed to not only change the ecosystem but the physical geography of Yellowstone National Park. It was a feat that had every park employee and wolf howling with joyous pride. What's most shocking about this development was how few wolves it took to really change Yellowstone for the better. Still, this reflects a human truth: it only takes a handful of people to make a huge difference. For instance, the Indian island of Majuli, located within the Brahmaputra river system in northeast India, boasted over 140 villages and over 150,000 people. Like Yellowstone, the island was in trouble. See, Majuli is actually the world's largest river island. These special islands are really just big sandbars that form throughout a riverbed. Sometimes the sandbars are so large, people can actually live on them. That's the case with Majuli. But, in the heat of a river's current, the island changes shape and size frequently, which poses a threat to inhabitants. In fact, over the last 70 years, the island has shrunk by more than half its original size. Why the change? Because during the monsoon season large embankments were built up the river to protect larger towns from flooding. This didn't allow the riverbanks to naturally flood, and therefore directed all excess water towards Majuli. As the river water eroded the island, space for the 150,000 inhabitants shrank. Since 1991, over 35 villages were washed away, forcing villagers to leave the only home they ever knew. Indian authorities are concerned that within the next 20 years the entire island of Majuli will be completely submerged and the 140 villages left will be lost forever. If they don't do something about it now, their fears will become a reality. The people aren't the only ones being affected either. Animals are being severely affected by the intense flooding, resulting in major casualties. In fact, the snake population alone has dropped by 45% over the last 5 years. When the river flooded the island, it would pick up the snakes and carry them downstream. The water dumped the snakes onto tree-less sandbars surrounding Majuli, leaving them exposed to the excessive heat in the harsh Indian sun. One man in particular, Jadav Paying from the Mizing tribe of Majuli, grew up watching the island shrink. He watched villages wash away, he watched animals torn from their homes, and he watched the villagers grow more and more concerned. As a young boy, Jadav loved nature, animals, yes, even the snakes, and anything that grew. This impacted him from a very young age and sparked his interest in environmental activism and forestry conservation. He was determined to save the island, and not just himself, but for his family and tribe. So at the age of 16, he decided to dedicate his life work to do just that, saving Majuli. How he did it was no small feat. One day in 1979, he started planting trees. He managed to get seeds and made his way to a large, barren area on Majuli. He dug a small hole using a stick, dropped them in the hole, and left the rest to nature. He knew that planting one tree wouldn't do much of anything, so day after day he returned and planted as many trees as he possibly could. His hope was that the trees would grow tall with deep roots that would hold the earth in place and protect the island from erosion. After 40 years of consistent work, he'd planted an entire forest on the island, over tens of thousands of trees. This work resulted in a forest that was far larger than the size of New York's Central Park. The forest was rightfully dubbed Molai Forest. He said that planting trees became much easier once he could seed from the trees that already exist in his forest. Still, Jadav faced struggles each day. With his forest continually growing, animals returned to the area. Elephants, Bengal tigers, and rhinos, to name a few, now call this area of Majuli home. With the return of animals, Jadav said poachers became a problem once more. Jadav said, "All species on this planet are animals, including humans. There are no monsters in nature except for humans. Humans consume everything until there is nothing left." In 2015, he was awarded the Padma Shri, the fourth highest civilian honor in India. Additionally, he was recognized by many other local Indian establishments for dedicating his life to the conservation of Majuli. Still, Jadav was frustrated by the lack of real help he has received. He suggested planting coconut trees because they're strong and straight, which would help anchor the soil, and coconut harvesting would boost the economy, all within 5 years. But sadly, no one adopted his proposal. Jadav refused to give up. He had dreams of seeing Majuli return to the lush green forest it once was before humans so drastically altered it. He believed that he could save the island of Majuli. He stated, "I will continue to plant until my last breath." It takes a certain level of self-control to channel desperation into something positive. Yet, in the Indian state of Maharashtra, that's precisely what Bapurao Tagne set out to do after his wife was embarrassed by a group of upper caste elites. Like many societies across the world, India still operates on a caste system, and those in the upper levels hold a lot of power over those below them. This system has oppressed the less fortunate for countless generations. The upper caste wields so much power that when Bapurao's wife kneeled beside a well to fetch water for her thirsty family, the elites in the area did more than just refuse her. They also ridiculed and humiliated her. So what did Bapurao do when he heard about the elite's treatment of his wife? It would have been easy to do nothing or to lash out in anger against her aggressors. Instead, he took all of his negative energy and anger, and he channeled it into something useful. He was going to dig a well for his own village to use. Over the past 2 years, weaker monsoons caused widespread droughts across India. Conditions got so bad that the government sometimes resorted to rationing water. At first, he wasn't sure where to dig. Location was important, after all, because, in order for a well to be successful, it needs to be replenished by flowing water. Bapurao closed his eyes, prayed, and honed in on the first sun-worn spot he saw. This would be the site of his new well. It had to be. For 8 hours every day, Bapurao worked his manual labor job, and when he returned home, he picked up a shovel and dug his well. It didn't matter if he was tired or sore. He did this second job for 6 hours each day, digging into the hard soil as much as he could. Of course, it didn't matter how much hard work he put into the well if he picked out a poor location. Would Bapurao ever find water? Days passed and Bapurao's well grew wider and deeper, but still, no water filled it. The villagers, the would-be beneficiaries of Bapurao's well, told him he was crazy. Even his wife criticized him for wasting his time, until eventually, Baporao doubted himself. Nonetheless, he kept digging. He just couldn't give up. It is difficult to explain what I felt in those days, Baporao said to the Times of India. I just wanted to provide water for my whole locality so that we did not have to beg for water from other castes. After 40 days of digging, he finally found success. He struck his shovel into the hard, rocky soil, and a small stream of water trickled out. Perhaps even more astonished at the sight of water were Baporao's neighbors. They'd mocked and ridiculed him, but there was water, right before their eyes. Lucky for them, Baporao was a forgiving man, and he encouraged everyone to use the well. They were still his neighbors, after all. As for Baporao's wife, whose hardships inspired this whole project, she was a bit ashamed of herself. I did not help him a bit until he struck water, she said. But now she's by her husband's side, explaining, it is already 15 feet deep. Baporao wants to dig 5 feet further. We are hoping our neighbors will help us. News of Baporao's well spread like wildfire. Soon enough, news stations and papers poured into town, trying to get a few words from the man with the shovel. Baporao even got his own moment in the spotlight with an exclusive interview.